What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Coty Davis, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News. And on this latest installment, I actually have a new co-host. Go ahead and introduce yourself, my guy.
Yeah, appreciate you for having me, Coty. My name is Tarohn Finley. I'm from Detroit, the West Side. Actually just coming back home because I graduated from Syracuse this past spring. So, had started interning for the Detroit News in the summer and covered various sports. But I'm happy to be here and happy to talk basketball with you, Coty.
So, with you being from Detroit, I gotta ask, did you grow up a fan of the Pistons? Because I know I'm older than you, which means I don't really know how much you remember the going to work era, which was a really good era. As you see, I have a poster of Kobe Bryant back there. So it lets you know I am a Kobe fan, and I'm a little bit salty about the '04 championship, how that ended for my boy, but that's neither here or there. But Tarohn, did you grow up a Piston fan? And if so, what era do you remember most about the Detroit Pistons?
So I was alive. I was just born in the going to work era. So, I wasn't able to recall many memories or anything like that from back then. So I did grow up a Pistons fan, but it was the dark days, I want to say. So I grew up around the time when the Pistons had Brandon Jennings, and then they had the Josh Smith, Greg Monroe, Andre Drummond front court. So it was a lot of dark days, but as we've seen with last season, it's a lot to be excited for this season.
Yes, sir. And I think that's the biggest part. I mean, probably for the first time in nearly a decade, maybe a little bit longer than that the Pistons are entering training camp. They're entering this new season with some expectations. I mean, Media Day was on Monday, and that's what we're going to talk about. Our biggest takeaways from Media Day. And at the time of this recording, September 30th, Tuesday, it's their first day of training camp practice. And like for me, one of the biggest things that, I took from this is probably the first time possibly since those going to work Pistons that they are entering a new season with some high expectations, building upon the success of last year. And I know they had, a little bit of success with the Blake Griffin era, but that was always seemed like, it was a Hail Mary if this can last. Shout out to Blake Griffin, because I think it was that 2019 season where he like balled out and that ended up being like the best season of his career. I remember watching him in Detroit, down in Houston, but this is the first time where it's not only that the Pistons are building upon success, but sustainable success, and that's really big. So we're going to get into our biggest takeaways from Media Day, but today's episode is brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. And for me, the biggest takeaway for Media Day is the fact that this team is going into training camp with a healthy roster. The only person that's kind of banged up going into the first day of training camp is two-way prospect Kobe Jones, which means that my guy Jaden Ivey is back to 100%. Before moving on, let's take a listen to what Tobias Harris had to say when I asked him, how has Ivy looked during their 5-on-5 practices?
With the team scrimmages you guys have had, what can you share about how Jaden Ivey has looked? Is he still the same fast and explosive player that we saw prior to his injury?
Nah, he's faster. No, he's been great. I think, when we were in Vegas and Duncan had just got with us and we were working out, he was like, dang, he's moving like that already. And I was like, yeah. I was like, he's actually moving really well. So he looks great. I think, the athleticism, speed is all the way back to where he was. Like, you can't really tell that he's missed a beat there. And I just think that he's just been playing really well, and being able to see him get on the floor, play his game, and just be in his element, having fun. He looks really sharp, really strong, really focused, locked in, and I think I know he's going to be a huge piece for our team. But he's really just gone out there and found his balance and found his speed out on the floor as well. playing. So I mean, he's impressed all of us thus far, and he'll continue to impress us, and he'll continue to get into his element before his injury. He was playing the best basketball of his career, and I think that as we get into the season, he's just gonna pick right back up where he left off.
Covering the team last year, who was one of the biggest storylines last season. We all know about the Pistons' success, 44 wins, having an opportunity to, go to the playoffs. And if a couple calls went their way, if a couple, shots out also went their way, you're looking at a situation. And if they was healthy as well, you're looking at a situation that the Pistons definitely could have beat the New York Knicks in advance. However, I think probably the most heartbreaking day being on the beat last year was the day that Jaden Ivey went down with that broken left fibula. It came during the Pistons New Year's Day victory over the Orlando Magic, and it just, even though it was a win, it just brought a somber mood over the team. And as we saw over the first couple of games, right before they had an opportunity to acquire Dennis Schroeder, you're looking at a situation where, the Pistons, they kind of struggled without him a little bit. Then all of a sudden they took off. But it's good to know that Ivy is not just back. He is not just healthy, but he is also looking like the player that he was prior to his injury. When you hear that, how does that make you feel when you think about what this Pistons team can be heading into this new season?
Yeah, it makes me feel good and, feel very confident in the Pistons because I know Tobias Harris has been around for a while. So definitely respect, anything he says. So the fact that he said that he thinks he's even faster than what he was last year, that just was a little bit surprising. So I think we still would have to see, especially early on, maybe in the preseason and, if he plays during that and then maybe early into the season, how he looks. But I think with explosiveness and just overall speed being the best part of his game since, he was at Purdue, I think that we just have to continue to monitor that. But that was very encouraging just to hear that.
And I like the fact that Tobias Harris talked about the fact that his explosiveness, his athleticism is still there, because when he went down with that leg injury, that's one of the concerns that I had going into the season. And I know it's going to take some time. Jaden Ivey also talked about that himself, because when the Pistons opened their season against the Chicago Bulls on October 22nd, I think it's going to be a little bit over 9 months since he last played basketball. And even though he's been participating in these 5-on-5, in these team scrimmages, it's still going to take him some time to work himself back into shape. However, it's still good to know that the Pistons have their, in my opinion, their second best player, because even though Cade Cunningham had this all NBA caliber season last year, and he is without a shadow of a doubt the face of this franchise, and without a shadow of a doubt, one of the, let's say, top 10 young players in the game today. And look, we talking about him being the face of the Pistons. I think if he continues to be on this rise that we saw last year, I mean, he's going to have an opportunity to be one of these, faces of the NBA in the next couple of years. However, I still believe much of the Pistons' success still fall on the shoulders of Jaden Ivey, because once again, as I just alluded to early on in the show, if this team had this team been healthy against the New York Knicks, they definitely would have beaten them. And I know when a lot of people hear that statement, they automatically go to the fact that they played majority, if not this entire series, without Stu. But at the same time, I still believe they had Jaden Ivey. They definitely probably would have been the ones advancing to the next round in a 6-game series with the victory. And the reason why I feel so much confidence in saying that is because when you take a look at Jaden Ivey's game, yes, he gives you another, go-to scorer, especially down the stretch. I believe prior to his injury, you're looking at a situation where Ivey was taking on that title as being this team's, clutchest player. We saw what he did in the game against the Toronto Raptors when he hit the game-winning shot. A couple months later, on a roll in Sacramento, he did the same exact thing. As a matter of fact, at the time of his injury, he led the Pistons in clutch points per game with 2.5, 3 points per game, and that's really telling. And given how close that series was, you definitely looking at a situation that if Ivy was healthy, you know that you was going to have another go-to scorer. However, the biggest thing with Ivy coming back is the fact that you're definitely going to have another secondary ball handler, someone who can help facilitate the offense, someone who can actually help, kind of lessen Cade Cunningham's burden in a sense, because we know Cam Cunningham usage is off the charts, especially when you take a look at those couple of weeks after Ivy went down, right before they got Schroeder. His usage was probably, I want to say, the second, if not the second, the third most in the league. I believe only Trae Young and Jokic was the only two players who usage rating was a lot higher than Cade doing right after Ivy went down within that month span. But with Ivy coming back, man, you're looking at a situation where you got that secondary ball handler, and it's just going to make the offense run a lot smoother as well.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that, like you said, Dennis Schroeder definitely stepped into that role, especially toward the end of the season. He would take that burden off Cade, but Ivy is that, times two, just, a lot younger player. And one of the most surprising things that I didn't realize was, that Ivy was a 40% shooter from three last season. And I think that spacing just was, an added part of his game, because we always knew he had the potential to, become a shooter. But I think we always talk about how explosive he is, how fast he is, how athletic he is. That can kind of be overlooked. So if he continues to, hit at that rate, even though it was a small sample size, continue to take some of that burden off Cade, I think that he will only continue to develop. And while I do have questions about his fit with guys like Karis LeVert, because, he is more ball dominant, and how would he, fit into this team, because they got really good when he went down. Not to say that his injury was the cause of that, but he didn't get to see the success of, the second half of the season or of the playoffs. He didn't get that experience. So can you just drop him into this team that has so much success without him, and has a lot of players that overlap in some ways? Like I said, the free agent additions, and even, Ron Holland, with him getting a lot of, attention after his strong summer league performance. How does he fit into all these young players and all these new additions? So those are some questions I have, but I definitely agree that he is the second most important player on the Pistons, and he will really determine if they are able to, have a strong consecutive season.
Once again, Ivy is a full go entering training camp. Both Trajan Langdon and Coach JB Bickerstaff mentioned that there would be no restrictions on Ivy as he tried to work his way back with the season starting up in a little bit over a month. That's good news. However, at the end of the day, look, if it start out a little bit shaky with Ivy, you got to give him time, because once again, when the season starts up against the Chicago Bulls on October 22nd, you're looking at a situation where it's going to be like 9.5 months since he last played. However, it's always good to see any team, not just the Pistons, but any team, when they have, not just a healthy player, but a healthy player that's as valuable as and important as Jaden Ivey. Here's what Ivy had to say about entering training camp following his season-ending injury.
It's been a journey, bro. It's been a journey. Definitely blessed to be healed, to be able to, look forward to playing games again. The journey has been definitely a grind to get back, to get healed, to get stronger. It's definitely been a grind, but I'm definitely thankful to be in this, this position right now. Be able to be back healthy and to do, what I've, been working for my whole life.
He looks a little stronger. He's been in that weight room.
Exactly. I mean, look, the man had a leg injury. I remember I think it was in March. I want to say mid-March when we had an opportunity to speak with him after one of the practices, and he said, that was actually one of the first, kind of activities that he was able to do was just, do a little weightlifting, which is good because we all know with that explosiveness, Ivy loves to attack downhill and finish at the rim. So, if he put on a little bit of muscle, a little bit, a little bit of something, he take those, hits and everything. It's just going to make his game a lot better. But once again, man, it was great to see Ivy have an opportunity, to be with this team, and he's coming into training camp with a lot of focus. He's also, trying to prove that, those 30 games that he played where he averaged, a career high of 17.5 points, as you just mentioned, shooting, 40% from behind the arc, which, last year, that was the biggest improvements that he showcased, in his game. But look, it's just good to see Ivy back, man, and I can't wait for the season to start because once again, when you talk about the improvements and how this team can build off of last season's success, I know some people, like you just mentioned, they have some questions about whether or not about his fit with this team, knowing that at the end of the day, the numbers, the team, the fit, everything looked better once he got hurt. However, when you add a player like Ivy, it's only going to make this team better. But at the end of the day, whether it's Ivy, Coach JB Bickerstaff, Trajan Langdon, whoever, the number one goal surrounding the Pistons is how do you build upon last year's success? We're going to get into that on the other side of the break.
For 44 years, Varsity Ford in Ann Arbor has been more than just a dealership. We're a family, proudly serving yours. As one of the top volume Ford dealers in the world, we're proof that when you treat people right, they come back, generation after generation. And now we make it easier than ever with complimentary pickup and delivery for both sales and service. So you can buy or service your Ford without leaving home. Varsity Ford, driven by family, built on tradition.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. So, the Pistons, once again, this is a team for the first time in like 10 years, maybe a little bit longer, that they are entering training camp with some high expectations, some important expectations. Once again, Media Day was not about disappointment. Media Day was not about fitting in with a new coach. Media Day wasn't about, learning a new coaching staff. Media Day wasn't about trying to not go on another record-breaking losing streak. It was literally about building off of last season's success, which is something that we have talked about on countless occasions since their elimination to the New York Knicks last season. And the number one goal on everybody's mind is how is this team going to do that? Well, in the offseason, you thought that the success was going to lead them into trading some players in hopes of getting a quote-unquote big name player. That didn't happen. But I believe the Pistons, Trajan Langdon, Coach JB Bickerstaff took a very good approach in terms of how they're going to build off of last season's success. And the number one thing that's at the top of their list, which kind of goes back to the foundation that they put in last year, is the fact that this is a team that's still young. This is a team that, if we keep it in the buck, outside of Cade Cunningham, you really don't know how good these young players can be. They gave you a glimpse. Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, Jalen Durham, Jaden Ivey. But at the end of the day, this is still a young team that still needs time to develop, and that's the approach that they took. Here's what Coach JB Bickerstaff had to say about the development of the young guys, but more so Asar Thompson and Ron Holland.
For the guys, in their development, Asar, like with the ball in his hands, he's a nightmare, right? So how can we do more things to get the ball in his hands, especially in the open floor? Can he initiate offense for us? Defensively, he's learning how to pick his spots, where he can be more aggressive. Like we need him on the floor. We don't need him picking up the cheap fouls. Ron, I think, is going to get more opportunity this year. He's earned that, with his play in Summer League and the work that he's done over this summer. You can see a transformation in his game. He's playing, again, maybe a small thing, but like when he has the ball in his hands and he's in the open court, he's playing lower to the ground, which leads to less turnovers, quicker decisions. He's got the ability to play make, and his shooting has come a long way also. So, I think those are a couple areas that'll stand out to you when you're watching them. But again, like those are the guys, JD, JI, Deuce, all those guys, like the younger guys here are going to be the guys that continue to push us forward because it is a really good core to start with.
The reason why I love that statement so much, not just the fact that he highlighted Asar Thompson and Ron Holland's development and growth, which, by the way, when you talk about, players who look really good and better than they did last year heading into training camp, those two names came up a lot by everybody. But I like that approach because there's one thing I remember Trajan Langdon said, I believe when we talked to him July right before Summer League, when, we talked to him, about whether or not if he's going to get a big name player, and he say, well, the addition of Jaden Ivey is the big name players, but when you take a look at the growth of our young guys, that's going to be just as good as adding somebody in free agency or adding, players through trade.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that, you sometimes can look through like fan Twitter or, Pistons Twitter and kind of see their frustration because, like you said, they don't have that big name. Like they haven't acquired that big name. They do have Cade and, a lot of the young guys, but some people may have wanted them to move just because of the success they had last season and the fact that Boston and the Indiana Pacers are now without, their best players. So people kind of want, the teams on, in the middle, so to say, to take that big jump just because the East is wide open, so to say. So people might want teams to make the trades like how the Magic did with Desmond Bane and acquire all-star player through trades. But people don't think about, the long-term effects of doing things like that. The Pistons, it has backfired on them in the past when they traded for an aging star. Because even when we mentioned like the Blake Griffin stuff, that only lasted a season or two, and then it was back to rebuilding. So I think that Trajan is trying to take the smart approach and invest in these players that he drafted, very high and continue to develop them because it really is going to be based on the development, how far the Pistons go, not if they make that splashy free agent move or trade.
And another reason why I love the fact that the Pistons decided to give these young guys an opportunity to develop is the fact that it also keeps their chemistry and their camaraderie as well. And I know some people might hear that and they might think to themselves, chemistry and camaraderie, that's just reporter talk. That's just coach talk or whatever the case might be. No. Coming from a guy who covered 2 rebuilds in Houston, coming from a guy who covered last year's, I guess I could say the ending rebuild of the Pistons, chemistry and camaraderie is very important, especially when you're dealing with a lot of young players, because you get an opportunity to just fall back into a place that you already have an idea of how this coach wants something. You already have a deal of how this player like to play. You already have an idea of, if I pass him the ball on the left side versus the right side, I know he's more effective on the left side. So I'm gonna do everything possible to make sure those shots comes on the left side. And that's not just me talking. That was also something else that was floating around during media day on Monday. Especially when you take a look at somebody like Jalen Durham, another guy that's definitely going to have an opportunity to take that next step. I don't know about you, but I truly believe that this young man has the potential to solidify himself as a top 10 center. Now, I'm not about to do no rankings. I didn't say the best center. I didn't say top 3 center. I ain't say top 5. I said top 10. When you take a look at, the improvements that he made during the second half of last season, when you take a look at the improvements in development in the offseason workout program that he went through, but not only that, and this is something I actually asked him about on Monday. I could play the clip a little bit later, but this is the first time in his career, and the same thing goes for Jaden Ivey, these two guys, this is the first time that they're coming into their season where they don't have to worry about learning a new coaching staff. This is the first time where they're not, trying to learn and see where they fall with management. This is the first time in their careers where they're coming into the season with majority of the same roster, and the few changes that they made is basically the same players that you just lost, if not in some cases better. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just love the fact that, Trajan Langdon and Coach JB Bickerstaff and everybody else in Pistons management looked at this as an opportunity and said, not only do we have these young guys, but this is a young core that's close knit. This is a young core that has developed a very respectable, very fun at times, a very reliable, very dependable culture, and these guys like playing together. And look, I'm not gonna lie, yes, there are probably a lot of players out there that the Pistons could have traded for to kind of, excel this whole rebuild, to build off of last season's success. Because look, if we keep it in the book, if they start the season, let's say 5-5, the next question is going to be, are they regression? Are they regressing? And we know that R word, that's what I'm gonna call it on this podcast, the R word, is something that we do not want to hear or see throughout this whole entire season. Yes, they're gonna have their moments, but at the end of the season, we do not want to look back and say that this team did not get better. However, I love the fact that once again that they are giving these guys an opportunity, because we have seen time and time again a team, the Brooklyn Nets, a breakout season, and then they look and try to flip a lot of their young players for big name stars, Kevin Durant, Kyrie, and then it ends up being a mess. And then you're looking at a franchise that ended up being in a worse situation than they were before they went out and tried to get those big name players. So I love that approach, man, and I truly do believe that, look, at the end of the day, a lot of this team building off of last season's success does fall on the shoulders of a lot of these young guys, getting better, i.e. Asar Thompson. Can he be more of a ball handler? I.e. Ron Holland. Can he be, let's say a respectable three-point shooter who can help, create more floor spacing? Can JD get better on the defensive side of the ball? Even Jaden Ivey, one of the things that we talked about in the first segment, his ability to facilitate with his playmaking, all that other good stuff. Those are going to be a lot of things that's going to the improvements are going to be dependent on whether or not this team get better. And I think that they definitely are going to have an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And yeah, it starts with this young core, but it also makes sense. All the moves that they made really made sense to me just overall, because even though the new guys they picked up aren't, those splashy names, they have, winning success. Like we talk about Karis LeVert. He's been on Cleveland the last few years, and he also has experience with JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon. So I think that made him an instant fit. And while Duncan Robinson doesn't have those connections, he did play at Michigan with Karis LeVert in college. So these guys want to be here. I know a big thing for people was that, maybe the Pistons have to trade some of these young players, because from the outside perspective, I know it's changing a little bit, but people didn't want to play for the Pistons, especially after that losing streak and things like that. And then I remember Jalen Green when, the draft time, but was saying he didn't want to play for Pistons. And I know you're familiar with that, with, the Houston connection. But that was, the stereotype or the thing coming in, that can the Pistons get free agents to come here? And even though, like I said, they weren't these splashy names, I think that people are more interested in not only playing for the Pistons, playing with guys like Cade and all these young guys, but they also have seen the recent success of guys like Dennis Schroeder. Like, we got Dennis Schroeder paid. The Pistons got him paid. I remember years back, he took that big pay cut, but, he got some of that money back this offseason. And while, the Malik Beasley stuff is still, waiting to see what happens with that, he did have a great season. So free agents and trade additions see that not only can I play with these young players, I can also come in, fit a role, and, get paid in the process. And another thing you mentioned a lot in the beginning was Jalen Duren. The biggest thing I like about Jalen Duren is he's also one of those guys that wants to be here. Even though he doesn't have that contract extension yet, it doesn't even seem like it. He's not acting like how a lot of the NFL players act in the offseason where, they hold out and they're really letting their frustrations be shown that they want to get paid. He's just going to work and he knows it's eventually going to happen. And that seems like his focus is completely on the team. He talked a lot about playing with Cade and how their chemistry has developed just, from being around each other for a couple off seasons and taking trips together, things like that. So I think that this is going to be a great off season, just like I said, just because every piece makes sense and the players want to be in Detroit.
And the best part about this is the fact that they're doing it with Coach JB Bickerstaff, who, look, Bickerstaff got hired, let's say about 3-4 weeks before I officially got hired at the Detroit News. But Bickerstaff is a coach that I always kept an eye on. He was always an assistant coach. I believe he started with his dad in Charlotte. Then he had an opportunity to really be an assistant coach with the Houston Rockets, and he took over as interim in the 2016 season. The reason why I'm giving you the background is the fact that he's somebody I always kept an eye on. So I followed him in Houston, followed him in Memphis, and of course everybody followed them and know the job that he did in Cleveland. So, when I, started to get word that, the Pistons are interested in bringing in JB Bickerstaff right after his departure from Cleveland, I looked at that and I said to myself, he's going to be the perfect coach to get this franchise back on track. And we saw him do that last season. And I still believe that he is the perfect coach to make sure that they continue to build upon last season's success, because he's done it before. On Monday, I had an opportunity to ask him, just as a coach, what are some of the intangibles that a team has to focus on in order to make sure that they do not show any signs of a regression?
I mean, it's a process-driven approach. And, I apologize. I know that sounds like coach speak, but it's the truth. For us, we know we're not a finished product. We knew we took steps last year, but we also feel like we left some things on the table. The season didn't end the way that we would have liked it to end. A few, changes, plays made differently, things like that, and we're advancing into another round. So our guys are hungry for that, and it's our responsibility as coaches and people in position of leadership to give them everything that they need so that they can take the steps that they want to take and meet their own expectations. Our guys have high expectations for themselves. So, we can't rest on our laurels and think that we've accomplished something. I give our guys a huge amount of credit for what they did do, but now it's our responsibility to continue to push forward. So as a coaching staff, we had to evaluate ourselves. We evaluated the team and figured out how we can help systematically and schematically the team get better. So we dove into that this summer. We've been preparing for it, and tomorrow we get to start to implement it and see where it goes.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. Before we get out of here, just want to share some more quick thoughts about Media Day that took place on Monday. I know we talked a lot about Jaden Ivey being healthy, but Isaiah Stewart is also healthy. Look, that guy, man, I love the fact that he's not only back, but he has the same demeanor and approach, man. And look, that was also a heartbreaking moment, knowing, when Stu left game one with the injury. And I don't think not too many people remember that the Pistons were actually up when he left that game in the, in game one in the fourth quarter with that injury. Then they went on that collapse. And of course, they was able to recover, but Stu just means so much to this team, man. And once again, the talk of the town was Jaden Ivey's return, but Isaiah Stewart coming back means a lot to this organization. It means a lot to the players, especially considering the fact that this guy, he told us, look, had the Pistons would have pushed it to a game 7, he definitely would have tried to give it a go. And when I heard that, I just perked up a little bit, because I'm like, hey, including myself, a lot of people believe had you not gotten hurt, you're looking at a situation where the Pistons would have beaten the Knicks, and you're looking at one of the biggest upset, over the last, 5 years had that happened?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, he definitely would have, tried to give it a go. I think if they did, push the series to one more game, because he just has that grittiness, that toughness that the Pistons need. And he's another guy that's, he's one of the longer tenured guys. He might be,
He's the longest. He's the
longest.
longest.
That's what I was going to say, from like 20. He's been here for a while. But the thing that I love about Isaiah Stewart is just, I think he could have played in any Pistons era. We talked about the going to work Pistons. He could have played for the bad boys. He just has that toughness and brings energy, despite, being undersized in some ways. You can't tell because he's always playing at 100%. So it is good to have him back. I know a lot of the talk has been about Ivy, but Stewart is going to be another addition that the Pistons need this season.
And another takeaway that I had in mind, and maybe this is something that, we can dive more into when training camps start, but I do wonder, if Coach JB Bickerstaff, and look, I'm going to ask him, but I know he's going to downplay it, because you're talking about a coach that do not like showing his cards at all. Any type of questions regarding strategy or anything like that, he dismiss it as best as he can. But I'm starting to get the notion, and I'm wondering, if this team is going to play at a faster pace, at a faster pace. Last year, this team, especially, I believe it was towards the middle of last season, they ended up being one of the fastest teams in the league. But, it was only so much that they can do with players like, THJ on the roster, Malik Beasley on the roster. Even Dennis, you talking about guys who have reached, UNC status or around the league, even though they still have one in Tobias Harris. But I do wonder, how much will JB Bickerstaff look to up the tempo of this team? Because throughout training camp and throughout the offseason in general, we have heard a lot of players talk about the conditioning that they put in. Even though a lot of it was, just to make sure that they get through an 82 game season, which is a goal of Cade Cunningham's. I think last year he hit a career high just playing 70 games. And, if he reached 82 games, my God, you're talking about that's going to be a really big milestone. But even though this is a team that every single season they came in with some type of injury, or in Asar Thompson case, illness, but a lot of these guys have put so much time and effort making sure that their body are up to par, and making sure that their body can sustain the wear and tear of not just an 82 game season, but also the goal of going on an extended playoff run next season as well. But at the same time, when you take a look at the speed, when you take a look at the athleticism, when you take a look at the fact that regardless of the number of Asian veterans that they had on their team last season, this was still one of the up-tempo teams around the league. I do wonder how much will JB Bickerstaff look to up the tempo, especially considering that he's going to play around with lineups and roster that feature a Jaden Ivey, or Ron Holland, and an Asar Thompson.
Yeah, that definitely, that's something that I didn't notice, but it makes sense. I have seen a lot of stuff about conditioning, and we even heard with Tobias Harris that Ivy looks faster. So in order to see that, he would have to maybe push the pace in practice and things like that. But even guys like Karis LeVert, it just seems like they have a whole lot of guys that can, bring the ball up. So I'm wondering, do they run, just more fast break type offense where whoever gets the rebound quickly advance it? And, you have multiple guys on the floor who can do that. And the thing about it is that we have seen Asar Thompson be more explosive, especially as the season went along. But even back to his OTE days, he was, very ball dominant. Him and his, brother, Amen, he wasn't as ball dominant as him, but we have seen him do it before. And the same thing about Ron Holland in, the G League Ignite. Was it the most efficient? I wouldn't say so, but we have seen it. So I think that just aggressiveness and their continued development, I think it's going to come with a lot of fast break points, especially as they continue to develop their shot.
I know we didn't touch on it a lot for this installment, but we definitely gonna have an opportunity to do so for the next installment. But that's the additions of Careless LeVert and Duncan Robinson. Here's what Cade Cunningham had to say about the additions of his new teammates.
I mean, first off, they fit us in a lot of ways as far as our core values, the way that they play, like the selflessness that they have, the grit that they have. But we brought in some guys that know the game, can help us a lot as far as just using their smarts, their feel, and helping us get easy possessions, easy points, helping us get stops, all those things. So having veteran guys that have been there is always important, and we're excited. I mean, obviously they have playmaking ability as far as shooting the ball, defensively with Javante, all the guys. So it's exciting, man. We got a great group of dogs, and we got a lot of versatility on this team.
Once again, man, we'll get into it a little bit more, what we're expecting from both of those guys. But I do believe at the end of the day, look, the biggest takeaway from media day outside of health was the fact that this team is excited to just have an opportunity to build on the foundation that they put in place last year. And look, I truly do believe, I don't know about you, you can let me know quickly, but I do believe that if this team stays healthy and the improvements that we saw to a lot of players, let's say deficiencies last year, like i.e., I know a lot of people talk about Ron Holland, shooting, and that's very important. But for me, I just want to see him play smarter. There were so many times where he made a lot of, I'm gonna call them rookie mistakes, because he was just playing so fast. However, throughout summer league and in the few moments that I had an opportunity to talk to him throughout the offseason, he just talked about how he was able to have the game slow down, and he think that's going to be very beneficial when he has the ball in his hands and he has to be the one, making that extra pass, or at times, depending on what's going on, facilitating the offense. But just overall, man, this team, if they stay healthy, if the developments are truly there and they fix those deficiencies, this team is definitely going to be better than what we saw last year, which is scary to say the least.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing if, the young guys make that jump that we talked a lot about on the second half of the show. Guys like Asar Thompson, Ron Holland. I really like the 9 to 5 nickname. I thought that was like one of my biggest takeaways from Media Day. Just, the fact that they came up with something and it fit them and, as defensive players. So I just want to see their development as two-way players. Of course, I want to see what they did with Fred Vinson this offseason, see if they just reach 30%. I'm not asking, for a whole lot. I'm not asking them to be, prime Steph and Clay, but, just a respectable number. But I think that they would do that. They seem very hardworking to me. And, I also want to see Jalen Duren. What does he do this off season that just continues to develop? Because I thought toward the end of the season, especially, he was really developing chemistry with, Asar Thompson, especially as a passer at the nail, just like him as a hub. It kind of was Bam Adebayo like to me, just being that undersized guy, stronger guy, athletic, and just continuing to develop their game from that. So I just want to see that. And of course, him as a lob, threat. And the thing that really stood out to me was just the development of JB Bickerstaff's bigs in Cleveland. Just look how Jared Allen and Evan Mobley even took leaps, under his leadership. So I definitely want to see that. And then it's crazy to say, but I don't think we talked about Cade enough in this, podcast, because we're talking.
That's so much good thing. That's a good thing.
Because he needs a break. He needs a break sometimes. So we're giving him a break this podcast. But I think that we just want to, see if what does he look like? Does he have another full? He wasn't fully healthy for all 82, but he played a career high in games. So what does that lead to if he continues to have, good health? I know he was all NBA, but can he put himself in that MVP conversation after, with a lot of guys in the East going down, if they can get to like a 3 seed, something like that, a top 3 team, what does he have to do to start putting himself in MVP conversations? I'm not talking about, I know we said top 10 young players. I want to see, no doubt top 10. I want to see, Cade put himself in conversations with young guys like Anthony Edwards, like Shea, guys who are around his same age, but have made that leap to being in the MVP conversation, and in Shea's case, winning it. So I think those are some of the things that I want to see. But with all the talk from, the first day of media day, I think that's going to happen this upcoming season.
And with that being said, that's going to conclude this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Coty M. Davis, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, that's Coty, COTY DAVIS _24. Why 24? Because Kobe Bryant is the GOAT. As you see, the 24 right there. And as a matter of fact, I think that dunk right there on that picture, I think that came in game 2 against the Pistons in the finals.
That's crazy. I think Kobe's definitely in that conversation, but all the young guys think LeBron is the GOAT. But
that's you.
That's me. God, no. Yeah, but thanks again for having me, and follow me on all socials at Tarohn Finley. I just keep it simple, so no numbers, anything like that at the end. So TAROHNFINLEY. Follow me on X. I was about to say Twitter, but X and
you
Instagram.
Can still say Twitter. I still say Twitter. So well. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.